Are you tired of watching enemies prosper while they destroy your reputation, practice witchcraft against your family, and celebrate your struggles with demonic satisfaction? Hidden within Psalm 35 lies the most devastating spiritual weapon system ever revealed, a divine arsenal so powerful it can expose gossips, reverse curses, destroy envy, break witchcraft assignments, and deliver public vindication that silences every lying tongue. While your enemies plot in darkness, thinking they're winning, you're about to activate heaven's supreme court system where God himself becomes your attorney, your judge, and your military commander. This isn't just another prayer for protection, it's a spiritual nuclear option that has been destroying the works of darkness for thousands of years. Every day you delay using this psalm, your enemies grow bolder and their attacks become more devastating. But once you activate this divine justice system, their celebration will turn to terror as their own weapons turn against them with supernatural vengeance. Psalm 35 operates as heaven's supreme court, where you can file spiritual lawsuits against enemies who are attacking your life, reputation, and divine destiny through slander, witchcraft, and malicious intent. When David cried, "Plead my cause, O Lord, with them that strive with me, fight against them that fight against me," he was invoking divine legal representation that surpasses any earthly attorney because God never loses a case and his judgments are always righteous. The Hebrew word rib for plead means to conduct a legal case, to argue as an advocate, indicating that you're not just asking for help, you're requesting that the Creator of the universe represent you in spiritual court against forces that are working illegally against your life. This transforms prayer from begging to legal advocacy, where God himself becomes your attorney, judge, and enforcement officer. The warfare imagery in verse 2, "Take hold of shield and buckler, and stand up for mine help," reveals that God personally arms himself with weapons to defend you against spiritual attacks that human methods cannot address. The shield represents divine protection that deflects the arrows of gossip, slander, and false accusations, while the buckler provides close combat defense against direct spiritual assaults, including witchcraft, curses, and demonic oppression. When you consistently pray this verse, you're activating heaven's military response to the spiritual battles being waged against your life, your family, and your future. God doesn't just observe your conflicts. He actively engages as a warrior fighting on your behalf against forces that seek to destroy what he has blessed. The most powerful legal declaration in Psalm 35 appears in verse 4. "Let them be confounded and put to shame that seek after my soul. Let them be turned back and brought to confusion that devise my hurt." This isn't a vindictive prayer seeking personal revenge. It's a judicial petition requesting that divine justice expose and overturn the evil plans being made against you. The confusion and shame that fall upon your enemies serves as evidence that God has ruled in your favor and is actively dismantling the schemes they've constructed to harm you. When their own plots backfire and their evil intentions become public embarrassment, it demonstrates that heaven's court has issued a verdict against their actions. The exposure principle revealed in verses 7 through 8 shows that God's justice includes bringing secret attacks into the light where they lose their power and become sources of shame for those who initiated them. "For without cause have they hid for me their net in a pit, which without cause they have digged for my soul. Let destruction come upon him at unawares, and let his net that he hath hid catch himself." The hidden nets represent gossip, manipulation, and spiritual attacks that operate in darkness, but God's judgment turns these weapons against their creators. The destruction that comes upon them at unawares often manifests as their own words and actions being exposed, their reputations being damaged by their own behavior, and their spiritual attacks returning to harm them instead of their intended targets. The vindication promise in verse 24, "Judge me, O Lord my God, according to thy righteousness, and let them not rejoice over me," establishes that your victory in spiritual court is based on God's righteousness, not your perfection. This eliminates the fear that your own mistakes might disqualify you from divine protection and justice. When God judges according to his righteousness, he's evaluating the situation based on his perfect standards rather than human opinions or accusations. The enemies who rejoice over your temporary struggles will be silenced when God's verdict becomes manifest through your vindication and their exposure. The praise and testimony aspect described in verses 27 to 28 reveals that your legal victory in heaven's court creates a testimony that strengthens faith in others who are facing similar spiritual attacks. Let them shout for joy and be glad that favor my righteous cause. Yea, let them say continually, let the Lord be magnified, which hath pleasure in the prosperity of his servant. When God wins your case against gossips, enemies, and those who practice witchcraft against you, the victory becomes encouragement for others who are battling similar forces. Your testimony of divine justice becomes a weapon that other believers can use when they face attacks from the same types of spiritual enemies that once threatened your peace and destiny. Psalm 35 contains the most effective spiritual technology for reversing curses, hexes, and evil pronouncements that have been spoken against your life, health, finances, and relationships. The principle revealed in verse 8, "Let destruction come upon him at unawares, and let his net that he hath hid catch himself, into that very destruction let him fall," demonstrates that God's justice operates through supernatural reversal, where the evil intended for you returns to its source with multiplied impact. When witches, warlocks, or anyone else sends spiritual attacks against you through spells, curses, or evil intentions, Psalm 35 activates divine redirection that sends their own evil back to them while protecting you from harm. This isn't about seeking revenge, it's about invoking divine justice that protects the innocent and punishes those who practice evil. The timing of supernatural reversal, described as coming at unawares, indicates that divine justice often operates suddenly and unexpectedly, catching the perpetrators off guard when they least expect consequences for their actions. Those who practice witchcraft against you may experience sudden health problems, financial disasters, relationship breakdown, or spiritual oppression that mirrors exactly what they intended for you. The reversal principle ensures that whatever they sent your way returns to them with compound interest, serving as both justice for their evil actions and protection for you from future attacks. This supernatural reversal often happens so quickly and dramatically that it becomes undeniable evidence of divine intervention. The net imagery throughout Psalm 35 represents the sophisticated traps that enemies set through gossip networks, manipulation campaigns, and coordinated attacks designed to destroy your reputation and relationships. When you pray this psalm consistently, God begins dismantling these networks by causing the participants to turn on each other, exposing their lies through contradictions, and revealing their true motives to people who had been deceived. The gossip networks that once spread lies about you begin spreading the truth about your accusers, and the manipulation campaigns designed to isolate you end up isolating those who initiated them. The suddenness of divine reversal serves as a supernatural warning system that protects other potential victims from the same spiritual predators who attacked you. When God's judgment falls swiftly on those who practice witchcraft or spread malicious gossip, it creates fear in others who might be tempted to engage in similar activities. The visible consequences of attacking God's people serve as deterrents that prevent future attacks and protect the broader community from spiritual predators. Your vindication becomes a protective shield for others who might have become targets if the attackers had succeeded in their plans against you. The legal basis for supernatural reversal lies in God's commitment to protect his children and his intolerance for those who practice evil against the innocent. Psalm 35 verse 20 describes how they speak not peace, but they devise deceitful matters against them that are quiet in the land. When people who are living peacefully and righteously become targets of evil attacks, God's justice system automatically activates to defend them and punish their attackers. The quiet ones who mind their own business and seek to live in peace receive special protection from heaven's court system. The multiplication principle of divine reversal means that the evil sent against you doesn't just return to its source, it returns with increased impact that exceeds the original attack. This serves multiple purposes. It compensates you for the damage you suffered, it ensures that the punishment is severe enough to deter future attacks, and it demonstrates God's power to protect his people in ways that build faith in observers. When curses sent against you result in greater blessings in your life and greater problems for those who cursed you, it becomes clear that attempting to harm God's people is both futile and dangerous, creating a reputation that protects you from future spiritual attacks. The tongue warfare described in Psalm 35 provides specific weapons for defeating gossip campaigns, false accusations, and character assassination attempts that seek to destroy your reputation and relationships. Verse 11 describes how false witnesses did rise up. They laid to my charge things that I knew not, revealing that spiritual enemies often operate through people who spread lies, exaggerations, and distorted versions of truth designed to turn others against you. When you consistently pray Psalm 35, you're activating divine intervention that exposes these false witnesses and causes their lies to become obvious to everyone who had been deceived by their slander. The truth emerges with supernatural clarity that vindicates your character and humiliates those who spread falsehoods. The shame and confusion promised in verse 4 specifically targets those who engage in character assassination through gossip, social media attacks, and reputation destruction campaigns. Let them be confounded and put to shame that seek after my soul means that those who seek to destroy your reputation will experience public embarrassment when their lies are exposed and their motives are revealed. The confusion that falls upon gossips often manifests as their stories becoming contradictory, their credibility being questioned, and their own reputations suffering damage as people recognize their pattern of spreading malicious information about others. The exposure mechanism built into Psalm 35 operates by causing gossips to reveal their own character flaws while attempting to destroy yours. Verse 21 describes how they opened their mouth wide against me and said, "Aha, aha, our eye hath seen it," showing that slanderers often become overconfident and reveal too much about their malicious intentions. When God activates the exposure protocol through your prayers, these individuals begin making statements that reveal their jealousy, hatred, and deceptive nature to others who had previously trusted their words. Their own tongues become instruments of their downfall as they expose themselves while trying to expose you. The vindication process includes divine restoration of relationships that were damaged by gossip campaigns, as God opens the eyes of people who had been deceived by false information about you. Verse 27 promises that those who favor your righteous cause will shout for joy and be glad, indicating that genuine friends will be restored while false friends will be exposed and removed from your life. The clearing of your reputation often happens dramatically as the truth becomes undeniable and those who believed lies about you recognize they were deceived. This restoration is often more complete than your original relationships because it's based on proven character rather than assumptions. The protection from future gossip attacks comes through the fear that falls upon potential slanderers when they witness what happened to those who attacked you previously. The visible consequences of spreading lies about you create a deterrent effect that protects you from future character assassination attempts. People who might have been tempted to engage in gossip about you think twice when they see the embarrassment and exposure that befell your previous attackers. Your vindication becomes a shield that prevents future attacks by establishing your reputation as someone who is protected by divine justice. The multiplication of blessing that accompanies gossip victory often includes improved relationships, enhanced reputation, and increased favor that exceeds what you had before the attacks began. When God vindicates you from false accusations, He doesn't just restore your original status, He elevates you to a higher level of respect and credibility that makes future attacks less believable and less effective. The contrast between the lies that were told about you and the truth that emerges creates such dramatic vindication that your character becomes stronger and your relationships become deeper than they were before the gossip campaign began. Psalm 35 provides supernatural weaponry against envious people whose jealousy of your blessings, success, and favor with God motivates them to attack your life through various forms of spiritual and social warfare. Verse 19 specifically addresses this category of enemy. "Let not them that are mine enemies wrongfully rejoice over me, neither let them wink with the eye that hate me without a cause." The phrase, "without a cause," indicates that these attacks stem from jealousy rather than any legitimate grievance, and the winking eye represents the secret satisfaction that envious people feel when you experience problems or setbacks. When you pray this verse consistently, you're invoking divine protection against jealousy-motivated attacks while requesting that God expose and punish those who celebrate your struggles. The causeless hatred described throughout Psalm 35 reveals the irrational nature of jealousy-based attacks that often seem to come from nowhere and target blessings that you've done nothing wrong to receive. Envious people become angry when you prosper, bitter when you're blessed, and hostile when you receive favor, even though your success doesn't diminish their opportunities. This spiritual dynamic explains why some people become enemies simply because God has blessed your life, and why their attacks often intensify when your blessings increase. The psalm provides weapons to combat this irrational hostility by invoking divine protection and justice against those whose hearts are corrupted by envy. The exposure of envious hearts occurs when God causes their jealousy to become obvious to others who had not previously recognized their true motives. Verse 15 describes how, "In mine adversity they rejoiced, and gathered themselves together. Yea, the abjects gathered themselves together against me, and I knew it not. They did tear me, and ceased not." When you pray Psalm 35, God often exposes the hidden gatherings where envious people plot against you and reveals their celebrations over your struggles. This exposure destroys their credibility and reveals their character to people who had considered them friends or trusted sources of information. The confusion and backfiring that God sends upon envious attackers often manifests as their own jealousy consuming them and destroying their peace, relationships, and success. The verse promising that, "Let them be turned back and brought to confusion that devise my hurt," means that the mental energy they spend obsessing over your blessings and plotting your downfall becomes a source of torment that robs them of their own joy and success. Their envy becomes a prison that prevents them from enjoying their own lives while failing to diminish your blessings. The multiplication principle activated through Psalm 35 means that attacks motivated by jealousy often result in increased blessings for you and decreased prosperity for your attackers. When envious people attempt to diminish your success through gossip, manipulation, or spiritual attacks, God's response often includes enhanced favor, unexpected opportunities, and supernatural increase that makes their envy even more apparent and their attacks even more futile. The contrast between your increasing blessings and their increasing frustration becomes a testimony to divine justice that protects the innocent from jealous attacks. The protection from future envy-based attacks comes through the reputation you develop as someone who is clearly protected and blessed by God in ways that make attacking you dangerous for the attackers. When envious people witness what happens to others who attack you out of jealousy, they become afraid to engage in similar behavior because they recognize that your blessings are divinely protected. The fear of divine retaliation becomes a shield that prevents future jealousy-motivated attacks while allowing you to enjoy your blessings without constant spiritual warfare against envious enemies. Psalm 35 functions as heaven's most powerful anti-witchcraft weapon, providing specific spiritual technology for breaking spells, hexes, curses, and occult assignments that have been sent against your life, family, and future. The warfare imagery throughout the psalm, particularly in verse 3 where God draws out also the spear and stops the way against them that persecute me, represents divine intervention against spiritual weapons that operate in the unseen realm. When witches, warlocks, or others practicing occult arts send spiritual attacks against you, this psalm activates heaven's supernatural defense system that not only blocks their attacks, but returns them to their source with multiplied impact. The spear that God draws out represents his active engagement in spiritual combat on your behalf. The angelic warfare activated through Psalm 35 is described in verse 5 to 6. "Let them be as chaff before the wind, and let the angel of the Lord chase them. Let their way be dark and slippery, and let the angel of the Lord persecute them." This reveals that your prayers through this psalm deploy angelic forces specifically assigned to pursue and harass those who practice witchcraft against you. The chaff imagery indicates that occult practitioners become powerless and scattered when confronted by angelic opposition, while the dark and slippery way represents the confusion and failure that overtakes their magical practices when heaven intervenes. The persecution by angels means that those who practice witchcraft against you experience supernatural pressure that disrupts their lives until they stop their attacks. The net and pit imagery that appears repeatedly throughout Psalm 35 specifically describes the traps that occult practitioners set through spells, rituals, and demonic assignments designed to capture and destroy your destiny. Verse 7 states, "For without cause have they hid for me their net in a pit, which without cause they have digged for my soul." The hidden nets represent spiritual snares set through witchcraft that are designed to entrap you in cycles of failure, sickness, or spiritual oppression. When you pray this psalm, God causes these hidden traps to become visible and ineffective while turning them against their creators, so that the witches and warlocks fall into their own pits and become caught in their own nets. The supernatural reversal mechanism built into Psalm 35 ensures that every spell, hex, or curse sent against you through occult practices returns to its source with compound interest. Verse 8 promises, "Let destruction come upon him at unawares, and let his net that he hath hid catch himself. Into that very destruction let him fall." This means that the sickness they sent returns as worse sickness. The financial curses they cast return as greater financial problems, and the spiritual oppression they intended for you becomes their own spiritual torment. The "at unawares" timing indicates that this reversal often happens suddenly and dramatically, catching the occult practitioners off guard when their own magic backfires. The legal authority that validates your use of Psalm 35 against witchcraft stems from God's absolute prohibition against occult practices and his commitment to protect his children from spiritual attacks. The Bible clearly forbids witchcraft, divination, and communication with evil spirits, making anyone who practices these arts an enemy of God's kingdom. When you invoke Psalm 35 against occult attacks, you're operating under divine legal authority that gives you the right to request heaven's intervention against illegal spiritual activities. Your prayers become legal petitions in heaven's court system where God rules against witchcraft and enforces his judgment through supernatural means. The permanent protection that results from successful use of Psalm 35 against witchcraft includes the development of spiritual immunity that makes future occult attacks ineffective against you. When God demonstrates his power to protect you from witchcraft through dramatic reversals and obvious interventions, it creates a spiritual reputation that causes occult practitioners to avoid targeting you in the future. The fear of divine retaliation becomes a shield that protects you from witchcraft attacks, while your testimony of victory over occult forces encourages other believers who may be facing similar spiritual warfare. Your breakthrough becomes a weapon that other Christians can use when they encounter witchcraft attacks in their own lives. The vindication promises woven throughout Psalm 35 guarantee that God will publicly restore your honor and reputation after enemies have attempted to destroy them through lies, accusations, and character assassination campaigns. Verse 24 declares, "Judge me, O Lord my God, according to thy righteousness, and let them not rejoice over me," establishing that divine vindication is based on God's perfect righteousness rather than human opinions or temporary circumstances. When you consistently pray this verse, you're requesting that heaven's court system evaluate your case based on truth rather than accusations, and that divine justice prevent your enemies from celebrating false victories over you. This transforms temporary setbacks into setup for dramatic comeback that glorifies God and silences your accusers. The public nature of divine vindication means that God doesn't just clear your name privately, he ensures that your innocence and integrity become obvious to everyone who witnessed the attacks against you. Verse 27 promises, "Let them shout for joy and be glad that favor my righteous cause. Yea, let them say continually, Let the Lord be magnified, which hath pleasure in the prosperity of his servant." This indicates that your vindication will be so complete and obvious that even neutral observers will celebrate your victory and acknowledge that God was fighting on your behalf. The public restoration often exceeds the public humiliation you experienced, creating testimony that draws others to faith in God's justice system. The timing of divine vindication through Psalm 35 often involves God allowing attacks to reach their peak before intervening with dramatic reversal that exposes the attackers and vindicates the victim. This pattern serves multiple purposes. It allows the true character of your enemies to be fully revealed, it demonstrates the futility of attacking God's people, and it creates maximum contrast between the lies that were told about you and the truth that emerges. The delay in vindication isn't evidence of God's absence, it's strategic timing that ensures your restoration will be undeniable and complete. The restoration that accompanies vindication includes not just clearing your reputation, but elevating your status and influence beyond what you had before the attacks began. When God vindicates you from false accusations and malicious attacks, he often provides opportunities, relationships, and favor that exceed your previous position. This supernatural promotion serves as compensation for the damage you suffered and as evidence to others that attacking God's people results in their ultimate exaltation rather than their destruction. Your vindication becomes a deterrent that protects others from similar attacks. The praise and worship that emerge from successful vindication create lasting testimony that strengthens faith in others who may be facing similar battles. Verse 28 promises, "And my tongue shall speak of thy righteousness and of thy praise all the day long," indicating that your vindication produces continuous gratitude and testimony that encourage others who are waiting for their own divine justice. Your restoration story becomes a weapon of hope that sustains other believers during their own seasons of false accusation and character assassination. The multiplication effect of divine vindication means that your restored reputation becomes stronger and more credible than it was before the attacks occurred. The contrast between the lies that were told about you and the truth that emerges creates such dramatic vindication that future accusations against you become less believable and less effective. People who witnessed your vindication become protective of your reputation and skeptical of any future attempts to malign your character. This enhanced credibility becomes a permanent shield that protects you from similar attacks while increasing your effectiveness in ministry and relationships with others who recognize God's obvious protection and favor in your life.